this is the marketing education track, and in this track we're going to take a step back from technical demos that we've seen this morning, and we're going to look at the big picture of geospatial, why geospatial, what's the impact it has on society, on developers, and the markets, and we have the perfect speaker to kick us off on this topic, Mark Einhart, who is a veteran in the geospatial space. He's played a foundational role in shaping a lot of the open geospatial standards that we use today. And he's a senior consultant at Geospatial World, and he is the former president of the Open Geospatial Consortium. So Mark is going to talk about the socio-economic impact of open geospatial technology from smart cities to national policy and beyond. So let's give Mark a warm welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I'm glad you all are in the room. I know you want to be off looking at code and looking at implementations, but I think I'm hopeful that this discussion will be a little bit uplifting for this profession. Again, my name is Mark Reichert. I'm a senior consultant with Geospatial World, and we're happy to be associated with Cesium this year. I'm also delighted that we're casual, because I think this is the first time I've delivered a briefing without either a coat or a tie, so I'm going to get rid of the ties. Listen, I wanted to talk today about your role in the global economy. And what's important is for you to realize that, the digital infrastructure today, a lot of people think of it as background or supportive, but it's really underpinning foundation of the global economy and public services. And you as developers are the key chief architects in driving that economic value. So I'm going to spend some time talking a little bit about the geospatial market. I'm going to follow that up with some discussion about your role as coding developers in growing that market and the impact that you're having. And then for the last couple of slides, I'm going to channel Ananya Naran, who is our VP for consulting, who prepared this presentation and did all the analytics. She couldn't be here today because of travel schedule. But I think you'll see in a minute what I mean about the consulting division and their data. So this is a snapshot of the geospatial industry. If you look across GNSS, positioning, GIS, Earth observation, sensors, IoT, scanners, and the like, in 2024, I think we had about a $600 billion valuation of the market, but projected for 2030, $1.2 trillion in value of the market. And what's really interesting is what's driving that market. If you look on the right, it's the evolving role of national mapping agencies. It's the equipping of countries around the world with a common framework in which they can build geospatial management capability and geospatial information capability. But more importantly, it's about moving to analytics and real-time insights and decision-making. We all know this, but these are the factors that are driving that rapid growth as new verticals pick up the power of geospatial. And the work that you're doing with Cesium and other technologies is just driving that in an upward curve. And I think it's a really interesting time for us as a society. One point I want to mention. Anybody want to take a guess at what we computed as the economic global impact of this industry? It's in trillions. Anybody want to take a guess? $30 trillion, and just to be accurate, they added 30.24 trillion, a few billion here or there, doesn't matter. But the impact to the economy is over $30 trillion estimated by 2030. That's amazing, and I think it's only going to keep growing as more verticals pick up this capability. And coders, geospatial developers, are behind the bulk of this. So if you think about it, the developers, you in the room and others around the world, are creating the digital rails that all of these verticals ride on. And I won't go into too much detail. I think you know the deal. Real-time analytics for transport and logistics. We can't live without it now. It's transparent, but you all are driving that. Agriculture, there's a company called Pharmanaut. Anybody heard of that? They process tens of thousands of images a day to provide insights to over 70,000 farmers around the world. And that insight is causing those farmers to increase their yields by 10 to 20%. Not insignificant for small farmers. There are other value points of that too, and I'll mention that in a bit. And then you have energy and utilities, where we're taking geospatial sensors and IoT to monitor grid infrastructure and look for areas of challenge and actually reduce impacts to the grid before they happen. All of that's happening with developers fueling that entire process. And if we look at the impact on the global economy, I think the broader impact has been measured time and time again. Like 1 to 3% of the GDP annually is growing as a result of your work. But more importantly, if you look at small, medium enterprises and micro enterprises in rural areas and different areas around the world, the work that you're doing, the capabilities that you're developing, the APIs, the standards, they're being used by local teams to create applications in logistics, market management, that probably couldn't have been acquired in local or underserved populations from bigger enterprises. That's you. You're doing that. And I think you need to take a pause for a moment, look up above the laptops, as I often didn't do, and understand the implication and the impact that you're having globally, particularly in the area of public service and public support. So lastly, before I leave this slide, I just want to talk about job creation. Recently, the World Bank indicated that by leveraging location platforms developed by the developer community, 15 to 20 million flexible jobs have been created in Asia and Africa. So you're building the economy and you're building the job market for those people that probably didn't have opportunities before. It's pretty incredible. Now, in terms of social impact, it's across the board. Take a look at how developers have leveraged different sensors, for instance, air quality, both public and private, to put together dashboards and indicators of pollution and its effects on public safety. It allows people to make conscious decisions about whether they should get out in the environment, and even hospitals about how to manage staffing in anticipation of increased cases coming in the door. And there's similar situations and capabilities that are being provided in citizen engagement, increasing that ability for citizens to be part of the civic process. Disaster alert systems, this development that you're doing is saving lives around the world. I know in one case in Vietnam, they have a monsoon warning app that gave recently folks 17 hours advanced warning of an impending monsoon and get people out of the way, get assets out of the way, save lives. But I think most importantly, it's about creating equity and transparency. What you're doing is enabling the environment on the public side to really, really step up and increase the level of transparency, accessibility, and equity in terms of the haves and have-nots, underserved populations. So that, I think, is another instrument that's being advanced by this community. So, developers are also increasingly entrepreneurs. Years ago, occasionally, you would see a developer start with a great idea and build an industry and get all kinds of venture capital. Now it's pretty much commonplace. So as developers, you're actually stimulating the development of the economy. Here's just a few examples. ICEYE, Near Space Labs, and Orbital Insight. Each of them have different focus areas, but each of them drove tens of millions of dollars in investment funding as startups. And I see Scott Simmons in the audience, the Chief Standards Officer for OGC. He and I were chatting earlier. We remember a certain individual who came to OGC when I ran the consortium for over about 10, 15 years. This gentleman, you may know, basically stood up and said, I've got this idea of creating an open standards business enterprise. Anybody want to take a guess at who that was? That was Patrick Cozy, a developer who had a vision to go open and to build a business and an enterprise around it. And he was right. So we're lucky to have him as a role model, and Cesium and Bentley for others to take this same trip with those good ideas that you develop as developers. Contributions and case studies abound. Geospatial World collects a whole bunch of these and documents them in our infrastructure. But if you look at Haiti, Nepal, these are cases where the globe came together to rapidly map after a situation and allowed emergency response services to do a much more efficient job in getting to those who are injured. In agri-insurance, they're seeing, I think, a 30% faster response time in claims for farmers based on drone-based satellite imagery and analysis and analytics that have been developed. And then other areas of flood avoidance and things of that nature. These are all areas where developers, I think, are making a huge difference and a measurable difference to public service in the economy. A little harder to deal with are some of the qualitative impacts, but quantitative, I think you can see that there's some really good evidence. In emergency response, that Haiti and Nepal situation I talked about, they validated that in areas that were mapped, 50% faster response time for emergency response. Agriculture, 10 to 20% crop yield increase, logistics, 1 to 3% GDP, and then citizen engagement, boosting that tremendously in terms of citizen engagement in the process in their communities. And then, as I mentioned most recently, being able to invest and drive your ideas forward into enterprises that make a difference in the global economy. So, a bit of a call to action. Developers should see themselves as infrastructure architects. You should see yourselves as able to move the needle on huge topics that not only have local impact, that can be globally implemented as well. You have an obligation, I think we all do, to make sure that we can get our share of the economic slice of the pie, but also do what we can to support social interest. And I think we as developers, and I'll say you because the last time I wrote code I think was Fortran, but as developers, I think you have the opportunity to really move the needle in creating the future that we need to deal with these challenges that we're facing as a society. Government, they need to recognize that code is infrastructure. They need to support tenders that support open standards. And I think they also need to be pushing the digital twin vision heavily, because that's the pathway that we're taking, I think, to improve our ability to understand and make decisions. Technology developers need to stimulate the adoption of APIs. They need to support challenges and piloting and other activities and work with the community. But developers, think of yourselves as change agents, as the architects for the future, because I think we can't operate without you. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to segue to some comments that Ananya made as she wrote me and said, "You're doing this briefing because I can't make it." And I think her words are just sum it up perfectly, so I'm just going to do it word for word. She basically said that building public purpose digital infrastructure requires an ecosystem that empowers resources, rewards developers, because the next decade's most impactful platforms will be spatial, scalable, and socially driven. And I agree with her on that one. So, developers don't just build software, you're driving the economy. You're creating measurable returns in the economy, you're saving lives, and you're protecting the public interest. And in Ananya's world, geospatial developers such as yourselves are no longer behind the scenes technologists. You are civic engineers, economic architects, and social innovators. It is your code that is a tangible return on the investment, safer lives, more productive farms, faster recovery from disasters, and greater equity in public service delivery. So I know this wasn't a technical presentation, but I hope it gave you some insight as to the impact that you have globally and the recognition that we have in the work that you do that makes it so important for us to keep moving forward. The challenges are getting deeper, and I think in this room we have the essence of solutions for the future. So thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, we'll be happy to entertain them.